Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Seepersod coming to you from the campus of Binghamton University on behalf of the Alumni Association. Welcome to day number 3 of Binghamton Success Week. This has been a great week for us. We've had career programs Tuesday, Wednesday, and also today. We had a webinar Tuesday and a live panel event in person in Manhattan yesterday at the SUNY College of Optometry. I know some of you have been with us for some combination of these different programs, maybe all 3, including today. So thank you so much for joining us. Should have a very, very stimulating program on tap. Our presenter is ready to take your questions at pretty much any time. So start whenever you want. If you are watching us on Facebook, you can type in your questions in the comments section. You can do the same thing on the microsite from time to time during this program. I'll put my email address up on the screen. Send me email, start whenever you want. We'll mix the questions in, and then our presenter will leave time for the last 10 to 15 minutes to close us out. And we will have time for your questions after the formal part of the presentation is done. As always, we'll put our binghamton.edu/alumni website address up on the screen. Many resources are there for you for not only keeping you connected to other alumni and the university, but also in terms of career development programming, events in person and virtual. We have a mentoring program. There's Career Shift with tons of job leads, LinkedIn groups, all sorts of ways for you to connect with other alumni, whether it's in person, virtual, or some combination of both. So, of course, after the show, just watch us first and then check us out on the web and see all that we have to offer. Binghamton.edu/alumni. I'll pull that down for now, and we'll bring it back up a little bit later on for today. So, at this time, we'll go ahead and bring in our presenter, Rachel Serwetz from the class of 2013, CEO of WOKEN and a certified career coach, has a lot of experience in talking about the topic which is on tap for today, and that being how to deliver a compelling interview. And she was with us on Tuesday talking about how to change your career path if that's something that you would like to do. And so changing your path, we're going to interview at some point. So this is part 2 of that talk. And so we'll have some great advice on how to perform well when it comes time to meet a prospective employer. And one more thing about Rachel, as I mentioned on Tuesday, is one of her bold 10 under 10 recipients and is going to be honored on May 4th with 9 others who are receiving that award at our event in New York City. And with that, we say, Rachel, welcome. Thank you so much. And pleased to have you with us once again. Long time no see, about 48 hours.
I know. Yes, I'm happy to be back, and I'm going to share my screen. So let's just pull that up right now. All right. So yeah, today we are going to talk about networking and interviewing, actually. So we will just sort of dive right in. Super quickly, if you don't know me, I started out in the corporate world. I was at Goldman Sachs and then Bridgewater. I was doing operations and then HR. And then eventually HR research. I got coaching training through NYU and certified through the ICF. I did a tech MBA at NYU Stern, and I did coaching through a variety of different organizations that you can see below. I also taught a class at Binghamton for 3 years, an entrepreneurship course, and I've been building my company for about 5.5 years. And really, we help professionals with all career goals and challenges you could think of, whether you're clarifying your direction, upskilling, improving your branding, job searching, you name it. We're here for all the career things you may need, and really just trying to be supportive so that every professional feels supported and guided at every stage and step of their journey. So that is what I do. So today we're going to dive into networking, how to find the right people, how to reach out to these professional connections, how to run informational calls really well. I think sometimes people just hop on networking calls and not sure what to say. And then sometimes we leave that networking call and it's like, I don't know what I just got out of this time. You want the time to be useful for you and for them. And then we are going to touch on interviewing as well, how to prepare and how to really showcase your fit as well as you can during the interview. And then you can ask any and all questions really at any time about any career topics, even though today is about networking and interviewing. So what are the goals of networking? So first and foremost, if you can host an informational chat with a professional who's in the role or in the team or in the company or in the industry of interest to you, you are going to learn so much, right? We want you to feel clear about your best fit direction. It is going to make your job search so much more efficient and effective. So really to learn and to reflect on what role and what industry aligns with you. So it's really not about getting advice per se. It's a little bit about getting data, getting stories, getting information, getting perspective so that you can inform what feels aligned or not for you in terms of your direction. Networking is also beneficial for job search. You're going to uncover open roles and opportunities that may not even be posted online. You're also going to be able to get your foot in the door and impress someone and show them, here I am as a human candidate. I was just on the phone earlier saying, look, they're not going to hire that piece of paper resume that you're applying with. They're going to hire a person. So we want to get that foot in the door and really impress them and just show them who you are so they can meet you. And ideally, you can move into the interview process after that initial networking call. And also you can learn during your job search. If you're applying to a multitude of different roles, you really want to understand the nuances of what do they look for when they're hiring somebody in that role, and what can you do to inform your strategy, your efforts, and your approach to set yourself up for success. You want to be the top candidate, and maybe it's a matter of pursuing some additional skill development, or maybe there's a stepping stone role that's a better fit for you to go after. We don't want you to just job search without really feeling informed as to how that process works for the path that you're pursuing. So that information is your ammo to make sure your approach makes sense for you. And so you're going to learn a ton. You're also going to get to know that company and the vibe and the pace and the culture, and if you would be a fit there and if you would thrive. So try to get to know that honest, how does it look and feel, and what's that company environment like? And you can also even glean more introductions. Sometimes, you have a call with someone and they introduce you to someone else, and that's really where the job might be. There was actually a study about how people land jobs through loose connections and loose acquaintances. So it might feel indirect, but it's actually probably one of the most direct ways that you can really get those opportunities that you need. You're also going to learn about upskilling, right? So if you're meeting with professionals and you're debating further education, or you're debating a course or certification or a boot camp or any learning program that's going to take you time and money, you want to be as thoughtful as humanly possible about what program makes sense for me, based on your intended direction and based on what hiring managers look for, what is most worthwhile, what is most reputable, what's going to be the best format for you. There's so many options as to how to develop skills. So you really want to be super thoughtful about what makes sense for you. You can get feedback on your personal branding. Of course, you can build mentor relationships. Glean resource suggestions, right? Is this professional a part of a membership, associations, groups, communities, any digital resources where they gather information or meet other people, webinars, conferences, workshops, email newsletters? What can you gather? What suggestions or resources do they utilize? So if they're in a role or a team, like it's sort of like, what are your peers all doing or paying attention to, or where are you guys showing up? How can you then infiltrate yourself into the right space and the right environments and follow the right resources and groups that you need to be a part of? And of course, you can share things with them. You can share your network. You can share information. You can share your perspective and be a source of help to them. Now, who are all the different types of people you can leverage? Sometimes we forget that our network can be really valuable to us. We often assume that we know who people know. So think about friends, family, acquaintances, past colleagues, any sort of organization you've ever been a part of, clubs. It could be a personal hobby that you're involved with, or looking into the mutual connections that you have on LinkedIn. But try not to assume who your network knows. Sometimes our best friend, our cousin, our neighbor, our doctor. I literally once had an introduction made for me by a chiropractor to her client. So being open to sharing with sort of anyone that you meet, like, here's what I'm looking into, and see who they can introduce you to. Sometimes we'd be surprised that the people in our world may know someone, and you would think to yourselves, why didn't they tell me that? They know I'm looking into this. Well, sometimes we need to send them a note and say, look, I'm looking to meet people who do A, B, C, and D. It shows that you're serious. You can also be clear about who you're looking to meet, and then see, give them a moment to actually brainstorm who they may know. And they may think of people that, you might not have, if you're in a personal social setting, they may not think to do that. But if you have a professional ask with someone that is a personal relationship to you, you want to explore who they may know. And then, of course, alumni, right? We're here at this Binghamton event. So on LinkedIn, go to the Binghamton University page, or, maybe you have another university that you've attended, or anything you've ever been an alumni of, and you want to find where is that physical alumni network. So on LinkedIn, and here's an example with, NYU, but you can go to Binghamton's page and you can search and look up the keywords of role titles or industries, or who do you want to meet? And if you can be really thoughtful in your ask as to, first of all, mention your warm connection and why do you want to learn from them, and you have something in common. So alumni networks are so, so powerful. That's why we're here today. And of course, you could reach out to cold connections. It's not unheard of that there's some stranger that you have nothing in common with, but if you can be really thoughtful as to, what are they doing and what do you want to ask them and what do you want to learn from them, and you're being reasonable in asking for 15 to 20 minutes, and you're being clear and specific with what you'd want to learn from them, some people will be open to that and being kind to help you. And even recruiters can be a really great source of help. Like, they're in the business of interviewing and knowing how to fit people for jobs. So can you get their perspective on what roles might be a good fit for you as well? So being open-minded, being comfortable to share and to ask, even in a social setting. And really, if you're ever in a in-person, setting, whether it's professionally networking or just in, maybe you're at some party or whatever it is, grab a business card, grab an email address, write it down, grab their information, and you can follow up later. You don't have to deal with this right then and there, but if you can get that contact info later, you can see how you can help each other. Okay, so when you're reaching out, of course, you want to be really, really thoughtful. I personally prefer email if you can find their email address more than LinkedIn messaging. Try to get their contact information, try to get an email introduction. And how should you reach out? You are going to be clear, authentic, and concise, and you're going to add context. Tell them you're learning, tell them you're researching, tell them you're exploring, telling them you're gathering information is going to go a very long way for them to know that you're being thoughtful and you're just doing your homework. You really don't want to just say, like, I'm looking for a job. You want to try to, what can the person help you with? They can give perspective and information. They may or may not have a job opening for you, but how can you learn from them, and how can you ask something that they can actually do, right? Which is give you some information. And so there's different scenarios. You may have a scenario where you ask somebody who they may know and you try to get some introductions. Another scenario would be trying to learn from that person directly and just having an informational chat with that person. And just make sure to be clear in your email, even though you're going to be brief. What are a few topic areas that you might learn from them about, rather than being broad or vague about, oh, I just love to network with you or pick your brain? How can you go the extra mile and show them that you have a few things on your mind? It's going to show that you're prepared to use their time wisely and that they can easily answer your questions versus, they don't want to feel like they're going to hop on the phone and then it's going to be work for them, versus like, you have questions, they can answer it, right? Make it easy, make it simple, make it clear. And it's okay to put some time and thought and effort into your emails. It's going to go a long way to really resonate and have that person just say, yes, I'm absolutely willing to help you, if your email really comes across as effective. Running an informational call. So let them know you have an agenda. Sometimes people hop on these calls, and even though you're the one asking them for help, like if they just sort of ramble, whoops, hold on. Goodness gracious. There we go. Okay. So sometimes people will just bulldoze the time and just ramble about different things. Come in prepared. Come in with a list of 5 or 10 or 15 questions. You, of course, can be in the moment in addition to your prepared list of questions. But you do want to let them know that you've prepared questions for them, just so they don't take it into a direction that's not helpful for you. And you want to leverage their vantage point. This is one of the most important things when you're doing sort of exploration. You may not necessarily need to just learn about their role, but what about the other roles on their team? Or what about the other teams that they work with? Or what about maybe there's a vendor or some agency, or they outsource their help somewhere else and they have some external stakeholder that they work with. It could be any number of things in their exposure and their vantage point that may be more applicable to you. So you can really leverage their world in order to learn beyond just that person's day-to-day. And so, yeah, preparing thoughtful, creative questions. To be honest, like, I think people skimp on this a little bit, where you can really sit there and wordsmith your questions. I actually have a downloadable list of really creative networking questions on my website, but really think about, what is it I really want to know? What is it I really need to know? And how can I best phrase this to be as clear as humanly possible? And be thoughtful. Take 20 minutes to prepare for that call. You'd be surprised what you can do if you just simply sit there and reflect and ask yourself, how can I best, use this time, and how can I best phrase my questions to get the information that I need? So yeah, in terms of job search, you might want to learn about, like, who are the last 3 new hires on your team, and are there any trends or commonalities about those particular new hires that really stood out, right? Get trends, get data points, get patterns, get stories. You want to understand the reality of their culture. Even for job search, these calls are mostly learning. At the end of the call, you can sort of say, I'm exploring, and see if there's any opportunities that they're aware of, and try always to get another call out of it if they're willing to introduce you to the next best contact to learn more about that open role, and see what other introductions they're willing to make for you. Now, if you're preparing, you want to think about your research and your questions that you have. And of course, if you have suggested questions, I'm happy to give you suggested questions. But if you have any other resources where someone has given you guidance about what you might think to ask, you can think about the person's background, the company, the role, the industry, the recruiting process, skill development opportunities. These are just a few buckets of areas that you might want to think about or ask about. Of course, you can read through the company website. You can read through that person's LinkedIn profile and just draft some questions in priority order of what you really want to know, sort of most to least, and just give yourself 20 minutes to prepare. Try not to leave it to the last minute. Give yourself enough time to figure out how you really need to use that time to your advantage.
I'll jump in for just a second with 2 mini commercials and then a question, and put the email address back up on the screen here. So if you have questions, shoot them to me by email. Start now, and we will mix these in during the show. Those of you who had signed up ahead of time to watch today's webinar, we're going to follow up email from us probably tomorrow, if not on Monday of next week. It will have IamWoken.com as one of the resources. We'll link to Rachel's website, a lot of free things there that she can talk about later on during the session, free coaching call, resources for those who are looking to make the next step up in their careers. So that'll be something else we share. But then also she referenced LinkedIn groups. Just a couple of minutes ago, we have 2 groups that are offered by the Alumni Association, and you're welcome to join either or both of those groups. Thousands of alumni who are part of those groups. One is a professional networking group, basically for people looking to make connections with other alumni in their industry or their region or both. And the other is a job forum group, which is meant to be more for sharing job postings, obtaining job postings. So join one, join both. The links to those will be in the follow-up email. And on to the question as promised. And this question actually came just after we had signed off on Tuesday. And so I held on to it. And hopefully the person who asked the question is watching today. And it'll be, what are the special considerations for later career pivots when current salary and continuing need is high, but the search for deeper career meaning intensifies?
Yes. So mid-career, late career, any really pivot, I think people worry a lot about, what's the feasibility? Do I have to start at an entry-level role, or how can I make the salary work? So first and foremost, try to give yourself the benefit of the doubt of just learning about what the pivot could mean for you. In our last session, we talked about a 3-part framework: the role, the industry, the environment. you might want to pivot like similar role in a different industry, and that might do the trick. Or you might just need a different environment, different culture, or you might need a different role. Obviously, that would be the biggest pivot. But sometimes there's ways of optimizing your next step without making it a 180 change. So you really have to ask yourself, what would be suitable? What would be interesting? What would be aligned? And try to start there. And then secondarily, you can strategize to say, how might I make that change happen? And maybe there's options, maybe there's stepping stones. But sometimes, when you do have experience under your belt, you might be able to make more of a lateral change than you may realize. You may have more transferable skills than you realize. If you've managed a team before, sometimes there's certain functions or roles where they're open to you learning some of the hard skills because you know how to be a middle manager or whatever it may be. And so sometimes there's openness to making these transitions easier than others, but it just depends. If you're trying to become a software engineer for the first time, obviously you're going to have to do a fair amount of skill development. So you really need to understand, what am I going after and what level of upskilling is required, or getting stories and getting trends and getting data points as to how do people break into this path? What is the reality and how does this occur? And if you get a few of those sort of patterns and stories and perspectives and information, which, kind of like what we're talking about today, when you do networking to learn, my favorite thing is asking similar questions to a lot of different people, right? So say you're looking into the world of software engineering, for an example, and you were to meet with 5 or 10 different engineers. How much stronger is your information going to be if you can really connect the dots across different companies or across different industries? That's really where you're going to solidify, what would this look like? And then you can make decisions and make a strategy and figure it out. You may say, what, there are roles that are a step in the right direction, but maybe it's not the 180 change that I really need. Maybe it's just closer to some of my interests. So getting to know yourself, getting to know what you want, and then understanding how these pivots really happen, and really just learning to inform what you may or may not want to do, and what change you can make to at least take a step closer towards your interests. So there's a lot more we can talk about with pivoting, but I'll keep going. These are just some example networking questions. I'm going to call out a few of my favorites. So if you're learning about a certain role, you might actually define that role in your own words and then actually ask the person, how do they define it? It's such a powerful communication tactic so that they can help you strengthen your own understanding based on the way you're interpreting things. Another thing is just asking yourself, what do I not know? What are my concerns? What are my hesitations? And how do I turn those things into questions to gather information? Another one of my favorites is, instead of saying like, what's your day to day? You can say, if your role was divided up into a pie chart, how would you divide up your week basically across, what are the key slices of that pie? It's such a powerful way of synthesizing, what does this role do? What does this person do all week? Sometimes people find it hard to answer, what do I do on a day-to-day basis? So if you sort of bucket the time across a few key categories, that's another way to more quickly accurately understand what that role really is. You could also say to them, here's what I think I'm great at. Here's what I think I love doing. Which roles or teams best reflect that work? It's another really good way of understanding what roles might be a fit for you. You could also ask, in their opinion, what is the difference between certain roles? That's a great way of understanding nuances between things that might be similar. Another really powerful question is understanding where a role could lead in the future, because any given role could lead to a variety of different future paths, but it helps for you to know like where it could go, because understanding the future of like what sounds exciting to you is a really good way of sort of triggering your clarity to know, oh, that sounds exciting, and so I would love to go do that. But you do want to balance like short-term decisions versus long-term. It's just nice to know, where could it take me, and do those options sound exciting and as a possibility? You also want to understand, what does it take to break into this role? If the training and the skill development and the pursuit of that role doesn't sort of interest you, then it may not be, the right role, right? You want to understand, you want to enjoy the journey of like, here's what I would have to go do to break into this path, right? So make sure that that journey of learning even sounds like something you would want to learn. What else? These are just a few examples. I've got a whole downloadable list of more on my website. And just make sure to reflect. If you're doing networking for exploration, or if you're doing networking during job search, what are you hearing? Really actively listen and, take a moment at least once a week to just say, what am I hearing? What am I learning? And what does that mean for me? And you want to make these pivots. You can notice here there's a quantitative measurement. This is a little bit more for job search where you can actually measure like, how am I doing? What am I doing? How much am I doing? And that may tell you where you can adjust. For example, if you're doing networking outreach but not getting responses, we need to look at either how you're phrasing your outreach, how warm those connections are, or maybe what platform and where you're reaching out. So you want to look at sort of what you're doing and how, if it's telling you how you're doing, right? But really just reflecting on all of this to see what can I adjust, what am I learning, and how can I pivot my approach. So this is a quick snapshot of networking. If you just need a super quick way of thinking about it, it's really what's your focus and what's your goal? You need to know, why am I doing this, right? So who do I want to reach out to? Who do I want to learn from? Then you can actually, sort of figure out some specific connection to reach out to and do that research, draft your outreach, send it out, host those calls, and of course, reflect after the calls. Interviewing. I'm going to touch on interviewing a little bit, and I'm sure we'll have a bunch of questions along the way. So we're sort of pivoting into what does it look like when you're actually in the job interview, and how do you sort of really thrive and succeed and run a compelling conversation. So in terms of interview strategy, right, you want to be clear, concise, and comprehensive. And that's why it's hard, right? We can't just ramble like we do in normal everyday life. We have to be organized in our speech. And how can we be comprehensive and concise at the same time? It's not easy. And that's why people get nervous, because it's that one conversation that you want to sort of leave nothing off the table, right? So how can we do that? You want to practice by pausing, right? Maybe you restate the question. Maybe you jot down a few thoughts on paper, and you want to think about what are the main themes or ideas or concepts or components of this answer. You want to show that you can think dynamically and think at a high level and think holistically and think comprehensively. So if they ask you some question, you might give a story, you might give an example of how and when you've done that before, but you also might just let them in on your process. Or maybe there's 3 main factors to consider, or there could be any number of frameworks or approaches that you give to answer that question. So you really want to pause and ask yourself, how can I best approach my answer? What are the components that I need to share? If you can comprehensively get your thoughts across, that's how they're going to trust you to operate independently. Do you know the important key components to consider for this type of work? Are you going to be able to operate independently? Are you going to be able to be resourceful and think about the right things and ask the right questions, right? And what's beautiful is if you can run a structure to your answer, use transition words to guide them along in your thinking. So for example, you could say something like, well, first I consider, who my target market is. And secondly, I make sure to do the market research into the competitors. And thirdly, I make sure to look at the data and the analytics so that we have the quantitative measurement. And lastly, I do an A/B test I'm making this up, but using transition words is going to help you to say, what are the different ideas on my mind and where am I going with this answer? Of course, give stories and projects and examples as much as humanly possible. It really brings to life the fact that you've done that thing before, right? Which is super, super important. And maybe you've done that thing not just once, but many times. So don't just give stories, but give context, right? You could give one example, but maybe that's something that you've done for years now. You can also let them know that and then give them one example. Always stay authentic. Don't just tell them what you think they want to hear. They're going to smell it if you're just being generic with jargony words. So worst case scenario, if you're nervous, just be yourself and know that they need to get to know you, in order to get confident in who they're hiring and get to know who they're hiring. It is half about skills and it is half about rapport. So try to get along with them, have fun, make it personal to an extent that's appropriate, but how can you relate? Like they want to know that they're going to sort of enjoy working with you. And then of course, can you do the job? And removing distractions. So even if it's virtual, if it's on the phone, if it's video, or if it's in person, remove all distractions. All you need is a blank piece of paper and a few extra pens and your list of questions for them. You do not need anything else. Be focused, be mindful, be present, and be in the moment. That's the best thing that you can be. All your notes and all your prep and all your practice is something you can do beforehand. Yeah, that is kind of my main strategic tips. I will keep going until I'm interrupted with questions, but how can you prepare? How can you practice? So first and foremost, of course, you can do research on the company, what's going on in the news about that company or about that industry or about the, innovations that are going on in that arena, as well as what can you read simply on their website. Take notes. You're naturally going to think of questions when you read their website. Now, practicing out loud, I cannot say enough. If you practice different interview questions out loud every day, even if you take 5 minutes, you are going to get so much more comfortable, because the style of speaking in an interview is a little alien to us. So when you show up to the interview, we want you to feel comfortable with the style. You don't have to memorize your answers, but we just want you to not feel like, oh, I've never done this before and I've never spoken in this manner and I've never figured out the pace of how to talk for 2 minutes. So you want to get used to that. And that way, in the moment, all you have to do is focus on, what story do I want to tell? And how do I think about, what to share when and with who, especially if you have multiple interviews in a row. So you really want to be able to be in the moment. That practice ahead of time is just going to do wonders for your comfort and your confidence when you walk in the room. So write down as many stories as you can. We can talk about the STAR format if anybody wants to learn about that, but it's a really good way of telling a story. And really every single element of the requirement of the job posting, write down a story that showcases, like, in your mind, how can you remember a time when you've done that thing before? So usually there's 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 bullets on that job posting. Really dive into each of the requirements, as well as the common behavioral questions. Of course, you're going to prepare strengths, weaknesses, a failure, an accomplishment. Tell me about yourself. Walk me through your resume, all that good stuff that you can expect. Once a day, pick a question, say it out loud, and practice it as if you were truly receiving it. So if your interview is going to be in person or virtual, you could bring up a blank Zoom, or you could just speak to a wall, but practice your body language. Practice, are you going to take notes on a piece of paper? You could ask yourself the question and then answer it. So really do all the different tactics. Are you going to restate the question? Are you going to use those transition words? Really try to recreate the moment as closely as you can. And you sort of want to, you can take notes ahead of time, but then you're getting off script, right? So what are you writing down ahead of time on your paper? You're saying to yourself, what are the main ideas that I want to include in my answer? You're not writing out an essay of your answer. You're basically saying, what are the key components? And you sort of get off script. So if you're going to memorize anything, you're asking yourself, what are the main elements that I want to include for this question? And you're just memorizing those key ideas. And then every single time you answer that question, it's going to come out a little differently and it's going to come out naturally, but you're going to make sure that you've said what you needed to say in terms of you've included those key ideas. Yes. Does that make sense? Steve, tell me what you got.
I'm interested to hear more about the STAR format of storytelling. I think of storytelling, and it's, I think, very easy for us to get so wrapped up into something that's so personal that the story gets told from our perspective and what it is that we may think is really important and meaningful, and maybe not having a great eye or ear for what makes it meaningful to somebody else. And the result is a rambling, disorganized, very long story, and we do the opposite of what we want. Instead of turning the person on, and we turn them off.
100%. It is very hard to get out of, you were there, but the other person was not there, right? So you have to tell this story in a way that someone else can understand. So really avoid using internal jargon. Maybe you had, Project Banana or whatever, some weird name of a project, or maybe you had some acronyms, or maybe it's okay if you're using industry standard terms. Like if you were using a tool like Jira or whatever, and the other person is going to know that, that's fine. But if you have any internal jargon, try to just use transferable words. So explaining the nature of that project in a way that someone else can understand who was not there. The best way of practicing is really if you can get someone else to listen. It could be a friend, it could be anyone, a coach, a mentor, a peer. If there's someone outside yourself who can listen, they're going to be able to tell you this didn't make sense. I don't know what you're talking about. And so you sort of build the muscle of, how can I clearly articulate my ideas and remember that someone was not there? Now, the STAR method is a great way of trying to tell that story in a concise, structured way. So S is the situation, which simply means, what role were you in? What company were you in? Were you leading a team? Like, what's the context essentially for where were you? When did this thing happen and where? The T really means the task. So it could refer to a goal or a problem. What were you dealing with? What was in front of you at that time? And really kind of what was the situation? And then the A, this is one of the most important parts, which is, what were the several steps that you took? Sometimes we munge it all into like, here's what I did. But when you really break it down, there was probably more steps than you realized in terms of what you did. Maybe you had to first uncover the true root of the issue. You had to analyze data. You had to meet with different stakeholders. You had to synthesize and present your proposal for a solution. Then you had to, meet with the team and get everyone's opinions and agree to the pathway forward. And then you had to oversee the project. I'm making this up, but usually there's multiple steps to the actions that you had to take to achieve that goal or resolve that task or resolve that problem. The R is the result. So what was the outcome, the impact? How did it go in the end? And you ideally want to state some metrics or numbers if you can. But even if you have to just say qualitatively, like, the client was happy, or anything that you can prove ideally as specifically and tangibly as you can, how did it go in the end, right? How did it end up? So yeah, that's the STAR method. As you can see on this slide, this is a little bit of an example of how to think about STAR. And yeah, another example, what are your strengths? The reason I show you this slide is because when you're writing your notes, all you need to do is write down key words that remind you of the idea, and then you practice out loud, and of course you explain it in greater detail. So this is an example of what you might write on your paper, and then you sort of try to memorize just those few key themes, and then you sort of come off script and just try to explain it, having memorized what are the key things I want to say for this question, right? So this is kind of like the notes and what it might look like on your paper. What else? Okay, so you want to interview them back, right? You want to ask them questions. You want to make sure it's a good fit for you. Remember that, like, sometimes, I've helped clients where sometimes saying no to an offer is the best thing. You want to make sure you're going to be happy there. And sometimes, look, if we're in a need for speed and you just have to take it, I get that. But if you have options for opportunities, or if you have a little time on your side, you want to be really thoughtful about, are you going to be happy there? Because there's only so many job changes you have in your life. You really want to be as intentional as you can. So now, some of your questions might simply just be impressing them. Your questions could prove your fit and your knowledge, right? So that is one way of thinking about what to ask them. But you also want to understand what you want and what you need. What do you need as it relates to the role and the day-to-day and the team you're going to be a part of? What are you looking for in terms of the industry or the product or service or the mission of that team or of that company? What do you need in terms of the culture? Don't just say, what's your culture? Try to get specific. Try to ask them for stories. Guess what? They're going to ask you, tell me about a time. You could do the same to them. So you want to think about, what do you need out of that environment, and how can you be specific? Really think about the traits of what you're looking for, and how can you get them to creatively give you examples or stories or data points to allow them to exhibit how or if they portray that trait as part of their culture versus giving them this like yes or no thing, right? How can they give you a story where you can assess what that means? So for example, say I like to feel empowered in my workplace, and you could say, tell me about a time that someone on the team brought up a new idea and how did that go? They may say, you know what, Jane brought this up and now it's in the backlog, and once a year we check the list for the budget and we implement a project. Or they may say, Jane brought this up yesterday and today she's running with it, or somewhere in the middle. But if you can understand how they operate as it relates to the things you're looking for, it's going to really show you what you need to know, right? And how do they relate to those things? Your phrasing of your questions can be really powerful. So be concrete and be creative in terms of how you ask it, so you get what you need out of the other person who's answering your question. And you can always ask for another call. You can also even talk to people outside of your interview process, or you can ask the recruiter or the interviewer for another chat. If you got an offer and you still have questions. Really reflect on your past work experiences. What did you love? What did you not love? How can you turn each of those elements into questions you can ask a future interviewer? And really, any uncertainty that you have, you should turn it into a question. That's kind of how to think about asking them questions back, and just making sure you're being comprehensive and thorough to get to know what it's like there. And of course, always follow up after an interview. You have your initial thank you note, but then about a week or so later, you can really email them again, stay warm, reiterate your fit, reiterate your interest, show them you have additional questions, ideas, show them what you're working on, show them an article, really use those follow-ups as a meaningful opportunity to show them who you are and what you're all about, rather than just saying, do you have any updates? What's the next steps? What's the timeline? You really want to, it doesn't have to be an essay, but, can you share a blog that you wrote? Can you share any additional information? Can you use that as an opportunity to remind them of all the great things about you? And of course, ask a specific question that they can really, making it answerable. What's the timeline? What are the next steps? Do you have any feedback? Do you have any questions for me? All that good stuff. So not just, do you have any updates, right? This is just a reminder, if anyone did not join us on Tuesday, if you have not yet heard, there is such a thing as a career exploration process. So I just include this as a super quick bonus, just to make sure you understand that if you're not sure about the direction you want to go in, know that you can and should pursue the steps of learning and reflection to figure out what path, what role, what industry is the right fit for you, knowing that it is feasible and important and beneficial to go through that journey of figuring out what it is that you want and the impact that that's going to have on your career and on your life, and really even on your job search, making it more effective to land a great role. And this is just a super quick snapshot of what is that career exploration process? How do you pursue it? And really, it just starts with reflecting on who you are, what you're all about, your affinities. How do you translate your strengths and your interests into potential roles and industries? How do you do research, networking, and reflection to assess those options, compare, contrast the different roles and industries, and really use that learning and exploration to figure out what is the best fit? And that all comes before making decisions on upskilling, branding, and job searching. So super quick overview of, what is that process of exploring and clarifying your direction. And just super quickly, just so you all know, here at WOKEN, we help people with all of these different things, from exploration to job search, you name it, really just supporting you with all of these, navigating all of these actions and goals and outcomes. And this is our quick website. I know we will reach out to you after today, but please do stay in touch. We're here to help in any way that we can with all of your career goals. And I'm happy to answer any and all Q&A that we have.
Rachel, thank you so much. And we'll put the email address back up on the screen. So do send us your questions. We have about 15 to 20 minutes left, and I wrote down some questions. I'd rather mix in your questions, so do send them, although I think my questions are pretty good too. So thinking back about a couple slides ago, we looked at interview advice. And so I'm curious what specific advice you'd have for group interview situations, because many times you are brought into a company and they want to have you meet as many people as possible. And the group interview is one of the most efficient ways that gets done. And that can be an anxiety provoking situation for some people. It's a very different dynamic from the one-on-one. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, there are certain times, I think this is going away a little bit more, but there's definitely like group interviews where there's multiple candidates in the room. Sometimes there's group interviews where there's multiple interviewers in the room. And it's a really good point, because as it relates to networking and interviewing, we didn't exactly touch on the mindset and the nerves. And that's absolutely a part of all of this, right? So first and foremost, just get support to navigate your confidence in general as you approach all of these things. But for group interviews in particular, It's a really good question. I think you want to do your best from a body language perspective, just to make sure you're sort of including everyone. Eye contact and speaking to each person can be sort of another layer of what you have to think about, right? If someone asks you a question, but you're sort of including everyone in the conversation. I think other than that, I don't think there's too much you necessarily need to do super differently than you would otherwise. To be honest, I actually would rather you not try to, not that it's an overcomplication, but you almost want to try to see it just the same way that you would, with any interview. And it just becomes more of a group conversation where you're sort of including more than one person, but they're going to ask you one question at a time. So I think really it's mainly just feeling like physically you can, incorporate everyone into that conversation. And each person might have different things that they're looking for or listening for. But to be honest, I don't want you to be almost like worrying about that while you're answering. So I would sort of just do your best to stay focused on, did you understand their question? Can you ask a clarifying question if you need to? Sometimes I say, with interviews, we sometimes think of it like we have to be this person we're not, but really you just need to show up how you would at work. You would be your best communicator. You would try to be your most strategic thinking self. Do you understand their question? Do you understand what they're asking of you? How can you most clearly, portray your thoughts in your answer? Like imagine it was you meeting with a client or some senior person at your workplace. You're being your best professional self. So I think if you think of it that way, you allow yourself to stay authentic and really think critically about what they're saying, but also just try to be natural and be yourself as if you were at work and try to not overthink it, right? Imagine you were in a meeting and it was your senior manager and senior director in the room. What would you do? You'd sit there and you'd be able to sort of have that conversation. So you kind of want it to feel natural. So I don't want you to go above and beyond in a way that doesn't feel natural to you, right? Remember and trust yourself as a professional. Like you've been in these different situations before, and try to tap into what you already know how to do well as a professional, right? In terms of clear communication and thinking on your feet and trying to display your thoughts the best that you can. There might be more to group interviews that I'm just not thinking of right now, but that's kind of my quick thoughts, Steve.
I think that's a great answer. And another question I have would be how to handle experiences where you're brought into a job site for a half day or a full day experience. And higher ed is one place in particular where this happens a lot, but there's certainly other places where that takes place. And I think about an experience I had way, way, way back before I started working here. I interviewed for a faculty job at a university in New Jersey, and it was a full day where an interview with the dean started the day. Then there was an interview with the faculty, had to give a teaching demonstration. There was lunch. There were another couple of interviews toward the end of the day. It's like, that's really draining. And for somebody really who's very introverted at times like I am,
Yeah.
it was tough to keep the energy level up. And so I'm curious your thoughts on, how somebody can, sort of manage their own internal processes during the day to make sure that, they don't come off drained by the time it gets to 2 or 3, when they started at like 8 or 9 in the morning. It can be very tough to have something where it's like grueling of a schedule.
Yeah, it's a really great point. I'm thinking about a client who had a very similar situation. So it, happens, right? And sometimes it's just meeting with 5 people in a row, 30 minutes, and they barely give you a break, or sometimes it's like a full day on-site thing. These things do happen. I think where possible, when you get a moment to run to the restroom, like you can, I'm such a big fan of like a 1 minute or 2 minute meditation. There are, I use Headspace or Calm, and, how can you take very quick moments to just like, you'd be surprised the power of what can happen when you do a 1 minute meditation. It really feels like 5. So just trying to really find ways to like regain physical energy and mental energy, and taking a moment once or twice throughout the day, if you can step away and just taking literally 60 seconds to close your eyes, deep breaths, do a meditation, you're going to refine yourself. And that's what you need, is to refine a little energy, refine a little focus, and refine yourself in that journey so that you can show up, continuing to answer questions and be on your A game. But at the same time, the way to maybe not contain energy, but not to feel like you're expending too much energy is also, again, it's okay to be natural. It's okay to be authentic. It's okay to be yourself. Sometimes when you're like trying to, we don't have to put on this show. Like, yes, you have to be professional. Yes, you have to be your best thinking self, but don't try to force something and be someone you're not. And if you're being yourself, to your point, yes, for an introvert, that might just simply be a long day. But yeah, finding those pockets, whether it's a meditation or the ability to maybe even step outside if it's an in-person fresh air, things like that. But really, you just want to get creative as to any little moment where you might have a break. And really in those conversations, just try to find little mini breaks, right? Maybe the person is giving you an overview or a lunch. Like, that's a moment it's okay to relax. It's okay to be yourself. It's okay to find those breaks in the day where you can sort of take that deep breath. Like, yes, you're on, I don't want to say you're on display. Sometimes it feels like this show, this, dog and pony show or whatever they may say, but really you just want to try your best to be yourself, because that's going to, not that that's the least energy, but you just don't want to try to force all these things. That's going to be, it will be exhausting if you're like constantly trying to be this perfect thing or say this perfect thing. Be thoughtful, be mindful, be present. You can speak slowly. That's another great interview tip, which is slow down your pace as a way of thinking more. You see how I'm slowing right now. Usually I talk really fast, but if you force yourself to slow down, it's a great way of conserving energy, but also giving your brain a moment to figure out the best thing to say right now. So that's another way to sort of go slow physically, mentally, and just conserve that energy. But yeah, finding those pockets, getting creative, and knowing that it's okay to be yourself. But sometimes it just takes really a little extra energy. Sometimes I say like interviews are a light switch. You turn it on, and at the end of the day, like, you might need to go home and take a nap. Like, you're going to be a little more exhausted than usual. But, obviously get as great sleep as you can the night before, wear comfortable clothing, wear comfortable shoes if you're going to have to be walking around, make sure physically you're prepared. If you're not a coffee person, don't have coffee for the first time. Try to really think about, your physical, sleep and nutrition and readiness and hydration, right? Drinking water throughout the day, having tea. Don't, do any new or different things, new coffee if you've never had coffee, or don't have 2 or 3 cups if you only ever have one, or don't wear new shoes if you've never worn them before, so trying to do what you know about yourself that helps you generally find energy, right?
I'm glad you brought up lunch, because I was going to ask about that, if you had any special advice. And as you said, be yourself. And sometimes people can get a little bit unfiltered because they forget that it's part of the experience. And that can be a problem where it seems so innocent on the surface. It's just lunch, but it can be just enough space for somebody to get themselves into trouble.
Yes. Great question. You want to find this balance of being personal, getting along, building rapport, building a relationship, but you want to treat it the same way you would at work. Like, you're not going to be inappropriate. And so if there's certain topics that you typically wouldn't talk about at work that are a little too personal or a little too sensitive, I would just, we all have our line and our boundary. So first of all, make sure you understand. And if you don't understand what the typical line or boundary is for those personal sensitive topics, go seek out a peer, a mentor, or someone who can help you understand what those are. And so understand the typical line and boundary at work. And then you sort of just like move your little line and boundary like a little farther over, where you may err on the side of like a little extra caution. And by the way, that means being a little more thoughtful, going a little more slow in your speech. Don't just knee-jerk reactions. Like, really think, because there's any multitude of ways of responding. Maybe somebody gets chummy and, cordial and friendly at lunch, and they're saying something. That doesn't mean you have to exactly relate or resonate. You can still get along with somebody by not maybe agreeing or acknowledging or relating exactly. Like, there's so many different ways of still, pushing a conversation along by still being appropriate. And also trying to still let them know who you are as a person. You still want to get along with them. So it can be, a little bit of a dance and a little bit of a dicey way to navigate that. But, you can also even practice, run a little mock session. Career coaches, we're here to run mock interviews with you, practice out loud. Or if you want to practice doing a lunch, like literally ask your friend to go do that and just see how it feels to be in the moment where you're not prepared and you're not practiced and you're not rehearsed, but you have to navigate being appropriate. And if you're someone who's, a little more using humor, or like if your personality is maybe, let's say dicey, and you might think it could go in the wrong direction, then really honestly just practice those experiences with a friend where how can you still be yourself, but be a little bit of extra, appropriate than you might typically be. So I do think it's like understanding where that line is, maybe practicing it a little bit and practicing how to go slower and be mindful and be thoughtful and understanding there's different ways I can answer this thing. And, it takes a little practice to know how to have that professional social, boundary or balance, let's say. Takes a little getting used to, right? But those are my quick thoughts.
We have an audience question from Tyler. Is there a generic way to phrase an introduction to a second or third connection to someone you know on LinkedIn? Or is it just, hi, this is Tyler. I saw you were connected to so-and-so?
Yes. Well, it depends. So if you're connected with someone, you really want to reach out to, say you're connected with Brianna and Brianna knows Jerry and you want to know Jerry, you would reach out to your mutual connection, Brianna, and you would say, hey, I see you're connected to Jerry. I would love to learn from him. Are you actually, is that somebody you know and would be willing to introduce me? You want to sort of what we talked about earlier today. You want to give context and say, I'm trying to do a little research about A, B, C, and D. I'm learning more. I'm exploring. Show them that you're gathering information and you're being really thoughtful with why you would want that introduction. You'd love to learn about that person's role, that person's path, that person's company, that person's industry, that person's journey. And maybe you allude to 2 or 3 topics you would ask them about. So show that you're seeking informational chats, show that you're seeking information, and just see if they're willing and say, I'd be so appreciative if you're willing to make that, introduction. I'm seeking to have informational chats to learn more as I grow in my career journey or as I navigate and explore my next steps in my career. Try to just not make it so job searchy language. Try to make it about how you can benefit and meet that person and learn from that person, because that's something they're able to do. That's something they're going to be more willing to do. So try to make it really thoughtful, like what would be a compelling reason to sort of make that introduction and what can be, a compelling, authentic reason to, have them facilitate that introduction. So that's just a little food for thought as to how to sort of, phrase that ask.
So thinking back on what you had shared on the STAR method of storytelling, is there a certain amount of time that you recommend that somebody try to condense a story into? Because what I may think of as a short story may wind up going long for somebody else and their attention span and what I feel like offering are probably not going to match up oftentimes.
Yeah. So I say give or take like 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and you can say a lot in that time. The other way of doing it is literally just practice with a mentor, a peer, a friend, a coach, whoever, because the listener will be able to tell you, like, did that sound too long-winded and you lost my attention? Or did it sound a little too brief and curt where like I kind of was craving a little more detail from you? So you really want another pair of eyes and ears. You can time yourself as well. But there's a lot of factors that go into it. It's your tone, your energy. Can you capture attention? Were you being clear? Were you giving transition words so they can follow your story? What was your pace? Were you speaking too quickly or too slowly? So there's so many other elements to sort of capturing attention. But, give or take, that's kind of the balance of the right length. Beyond 2 minutes, like it can be a little too long. You don't want to lose somebody. So again, it is a weird balance. And this is why you want to practice out loud. So if you have 5 or 10 or 15 common best, project stories, literally out loud, use that STAR method and just say it out loud, because you sort of have to workshop. If there was a project that took you 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, how can you speak in 2 minutes to tell that story. Even though the project took so long, there are ways of summarizing things clearly, and just know that they can always ask follow-up questions. They can always ask for more detail. So you want to find that happy medium of like giving them enough where this STAR, it sort of comes to resolution in the end. But also they're very much, you leave it to them to react and ask for more detail where they truly want to hear more from you about.
Before we wrap up, I just have one more question relating to interviews. It would be about how to manage your emotions and temper your expectations during the interview, because I think sometimes it's very easy to pick up on cues that are happening around you in the room and to form conclusions about how the experience is going that may or may not actually be true. Like, let's just say you do the group interview and you get that one tough person and they don't react to something, or maybe their face looks sour, and you sort of internalize that maybe you shouldn't, and you should just ignore it and look at everything else in the room. But it can be a little bit easy, I think, to get a sense maybe this isn't going well, or to take it the opposite way and you read something or you feel like, I feel good, but it doesn't necessarily match up to, okay, I think it went well, but I don't get a call after. That could be a very tough thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think in the moment, do your best not, like, you do want to sort of build rapport and understand their tone and their energy, but try not to, look into some of those things, because you never know. Like, somebody could just simply be serious, or somebody could have any number of personality traits or whatever. We don't know what is going on for them and what they're thinking. So yes, you want to sort of pay attention to manage the conversation with the right tone and energy, but try your best to practice how to be present and how to be mindful and how to be thoughtful with your own communication. And if they're not engaging, I mean, you could get creative and maybe you ask them a question, maybe you engage them. So you could sort of use it as an opportunity to like see how you may adjust yourself, but try your best to like not overthink it. And as long as you're practicing how to be as thoughtful as you can with your communication and your energy and your tone, all you really can do is control yourself. So, it's, you don't want to be thinking about too many things to distract you in the moment. I know it is hard to do. But on that note, I know we're sort of at time, so I'll let you wrap up, Steve, and we'll have this recording for everyone to watch after.
Yeah, so that was one of the questions that we got by email is, will the recordings be available after the fact? They certainly will be, and the link will be in the email that goes out to everybody who registered, but we'll also link to it from the homepage, and it's a good opportunity to put that back up on the screen, binghamton.edu/alumni, and one of the cells that are on the homepage will take you to the archived videos of this session and the one from Tuesday. And Rachel, you've done double duty with us this week, and we appreciate it very much, and thank you so much. And I know our alumni are finding it helpful, because we got a lot of great feedback after Tuesday's session. I'm sure today's will do the same, and we really appreciate the time that you've spent helping everyone. And Rachel's website is going to be in the follow-up email as well, and so she'll be very happy to hear from you. Thank you again very much.
You're very welcome, and I'll see you all soon.
And that's going to wrap it up for today. Put our website address back up on the screen one more time. And so we certainly appreciate all of you who had participated in Binghamton Success Week, either by attending the webinar on Tuesday in addition to this one, or maybe did Tuesday or Thursday, did the panel in New York City. Some of you got bonus points for doing all three. The biggest thing is that we really hope the information has been helpful to you and will help you to make the next step up in your career, because that's what it's all about. It's success. Your success is our success, and we really wish that for you. And again, these recordings will be up perpetually so that you can always dip back in and take a look at what you need. And if you want to watch something again, look at the slides, or get Rachel's advice, that is all there for you. So that'll wrap it up for today. Our next program that we'll have on tap is going to be May 16th, and that's going to be a Tier Talks webinar Tuesday night, May 16th at 6:30. And that's going to be a critical look at the New York City housing market, the program called A Place to Call Home. And we'll have two alumni who are experts in the real estate space in the New York City market, talking about trends, and then also efforts to maintain affordable housing. So prices, as we know, are going up, but we want to make sure it's a place for everyone. And so we're going to be covering all sides of the issue. Should be a very, very stimulating program. So for Rachel Serwetz, I'm Steve Seepersod. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time on the Binghamton Learning Network.